space to shift from dreaming to actions. Cultural facilities of the city include Jorge Luis Gaitan, including the previously known Cinemateca Estatal, the Open Air Theater, El Ensueño Theater, the Platform Bogotá of Art, Science and Technology of Artes, the Bogotá Cinema, Casona de la Danza, and the San Jorge Theater. Thanks to our ally, the Embassy of Canada, Envolver, Universidad de Rosario, Fondo Acción, Peterborough, Book, Kai Culture, WSP, Julie's Bicycle, the Center for Sustainable Practice in Arts, the Julio María Santo Domingo Theater, Radioni, Ministry of Environment, Secretary of Environment, Culture, and the Office of the Mayor of Bogota. Today we'll be talking about public policy sustainability, a space to exchange knowledge regarding public policies, transforming relationship between art and sustainability. Today's lecture will be led by Elizabeth Valenzuela, a biologist from Universidad Nacional de Colombia with 20 years of experience in climate change, public policies, conservation, and protected area management, citizen participation, and sustainable rural development. She has been the technical director to the Preservation Agreement for Tropical Forests. Welcome. Good morning. I'm very pleased to be here sharing reflections and experiences that we've had for 7 years. Fondo Acción is a private fund with over 2
Recording in progress.
Leer, entender, conversar, mirar cuáles son los hábitos, costumbres, quién es la gente que se encuentra en cada una de las áreas y territorios en los que trabajamos. Pensamos juntos con las
entities and
comunidades.
the organizations, as well as government entities and companies. We figure out what we can do and build together. We act in order to take actions with a plan and a common target, and then we try to measure. And finally, when we communicate, we hope to inspire others. We hope we can learn, improve, and share knowledge. What for? To create possible territories. So this is the beginning of our thoughts about art and climate change. When you Google climate change, these are the images. Images, of course, show contrast, like the two faces of a coin, chaos versus order, hope versus despair, crisis, collapse, but on the other hand, also the possibility of rebuilding and hope. So these are the images that we see, but I started wondering, how were they telling us these things? This is one of the press notes or press releases that I found about climate change. It's from 1912, and they already saying that coal consumption can affect weather. They talk about the tons that ovens and chimneys produce, which will produce a blanket effect now known as the greenhouse effect. All the names that it has been given. This is the blanket that was warming the earth. And what it says is that its effect could be considerable in a few centuries. That's in 1912. Next. In Culture Notes in La Voz de Galicia newspaper, it talks about the changes in an event because the winter came sooner than expected and they had to change the cultural agenda. In 1942, another article, are cannons to blame for the bad weather? They already said that it is not normal, that excess carbon is probably the cause for this atmosphere warming. And this comes together with the explosions during the war. 1976 now. News are more frequent and more blunt. They're just saying the earth is warming. High temperatures being recorded affecting different countries, and something that comes up in climatology, the butterfly effect. As these news pieces, when a Chinese person sneezes in Beijing, it snows in San Francisco. There are specific events somewhere in the planet, and there's a planetary connection. It's a complex, chaotic system, relationships not just one to one. What happens on one side of the planet affects us all. Also foreseeing changes in climate, also in 1976. This piece of news talks about greenhouse effects, CO2, that accumulates in the atmosphere. In 1985, this is a deeper note. It explains each part of the phenomenon, which ultimately we understand as climate change, and the term is finally coined when the Intergovernmental Climate Change Panel gathers scientists, academics, politicians, and they all connect all the events and realize that the coal, the carbon that was located underground as, as oil and coal is now being sent to the atmosphere. It's being moved from one place to another, thus affecting the balance that had been around for 1,000 or thousands of years. So this is changing the composition of the atmosphere related to human activities and thus affecting climate in two variables, temperature and precipitation, with consequences on human life. This gives rise to the definition of global change, climate change. Nathaniel Rich wrote, Perdiendo la Tierra, Losing Earth. Remember that I told you that I started to look or to try to figure out what was going on and how were they communicating. The underlying question is, if we know it, why don't we do anymore? If we understand it, why is there not enough action? How can we have a positive and meaningful impact? This journalist in her book says that what we know now, we already knew in 1979. And in fact, we could have understood it better. But the problem is that we started to overthink the phenomena to try to understand the thorough, the minuscule details and the relationship between variables, rather than thinking about what was already going on and to anticipate the changes that we are undergoing right now and that are going to be increasingly stronger. So the book is really harsh. There's a lot on it about what's going on, how they were really close to making decisions, but nothing happened. Because there's three realms, technical, policy, and economic. Sometimes the scales shift to one side or the other, but there's not enough balance in order to make decisions and take action. This image that I took from a course in Julius Bicycle. With all that we see in the news, what's going on, where do I stand? I can go from one side, fear, anxiety, where you oversaturated about the crisis and the threat to the economic systems and our lives, also in the way of life. Or do we shift towards hope, optimism, based on creativity and the possibilities of building a new world? And we move between one and the other. When we think of art as an answer, we think of culture as the ways to see and understand and think and act on the way of life and our relationship with nature. We tilt towards hope, optimism, and to think that we can actually change what we're doing. This is where we are. We're in a little corner of the galaxy. But ultimately, we're here. That's where we are, in this planet, which is gorgeous. The only home that we have, the only one that we know. And that's our perspective. Can we play an audio file here? I wrote this script a few years ago. It's
Año
based on
1750. 791 millones de personas. 13 grados Celsius en promedio. 280 partes por millón de CO2 en la atmósfera. Habitamos un planeta que creemos nuestro. Lo exploramos y sentimos. El conocimiento ilumina el camino. La naturaleza nos inspira, nos provee y nos abriga.
Provides and uses warmth.
Año 1800. 1.000 millones de personas. 13
13
grados Celsius en promedio. 283,2 partes por millón de CO2 en la atmósfera. Producimos y soñamos lo perfecto. El agua se vuelve vapor y mueve la máquina. Viajamos y queremos ir más rápido. El carbón se vuelve humo y mueve el ferrocarril. Año 1850. 1.200 millones de personas. 13,6 grados Celsius en promedio. 284,7 partes por millón de CO2 en la atmósfera. Crecemos y vamos más allá de las fronteras. Intentamos controlar el tiempo. Producimos más de lo que consumimos. Una gran prosperidad económica anticipa cautela en los mercados. Estalla la crisis. El pánico se hace global. Año 1930. 2.000 millones de personas. 13,7 grados Celsius en promedio. 307,5 partes por millón de CO2 en la atmósfera. El aire se torna gris, oscuro y denso. Producimos objetos de corta vida. Compramos y desechamos. Quien intenta predecir nos advierte. El aleteo de una mariposa en Brasil puede crear un tornado en Texas. Año 1960. 3.000 millones de personas. 13,9 grados Celsius en promedio. 317 partes por millón de CO2 en la atmósfera. La promesa del progreso nos alcanza. Se produce más comida, pero el hambre persiste. Quien observa nos advierte. El silencio llega a los bosques. Los pájaros no cantan. La belleza y la perfección del planeta han sido alteradas. La naturaleza dotada de voluntad es víctima y verdugo. Año 1970. 4.000 millones de personas. 14,1 grados Celsius en promedio. 325 partes por millón de CO2 en la atmósfera. Un planeta no es suficiente, pero solo tenemos uno. El colapso parece inevitable. Quien intenta predecir nos advierte. En un planeta limitado, el crecimiento no es sostenible. Datos y modelos convocan la discusión. La evidencia concluye, la Tierra se calienta. Año 2000. 6.000 millones de personas. 14,4 grados Celsius en promedio, 369 partes por millón de CO2 en la atmósfera. En solo 3 generaciones, cambiamos el planeta. Aún no cambiamos nosotros. Creemos en objetivos globales con soluciones locales. Buscamos respuestas. Encontramos opciones. Año 2015. 7.300 millones de personas, 14,81 grados Celsius en promedio, 400 partes por millón de CO2 en la atmósfera. Por primera vez, después de 20 años, un manifiesto por un mundo mejor. Con lágrimas y aplausos, 195 países acuerdan la meta común. La utopía anticipa un camino que se cimienta en la equidad. Mantener el aumento de temperatura muy por debajo de 2 grados Celsius. Y para la mitad del siglo, equilibrio entre las emisiones que se producen y se capturan. Año 2017. 7.700 millones de personas, 14,84 grados Celsius en promedio, 406 partes por millón de CO2 en la atmósfera. Si el conocimiento es poder, la ignorancia es impotencia. Sofismas y falacias distraen la atención. Una voz se alza. No me lo creo. Competitividad, crecimiento y empleo inclinan la balanza. Aquel que abandona el propósito colectivo siembra desesperanza. La vida es muy difícil para muchos aquí y ahora. Año 2020. 7.753 millones de personas, 14,92 grados Celsius en promedio, 412,5 partes por millón de CO2 en la atmósfera. Las puertas se cierran, los motores se apagan, quietud y silencio. Otros diferentes de nosotros caminan en las calles y cantan en las ciudades. Un hasta pronto estiró la distancia, 2 metros se vuelve la norma. Trajes, máscaras, guantes, respirar para vivir, respirar y no contagiar. 3 millones, cifras no oficiales, ahora ausentes. Quien intenta predecir nos advierte, somos parte de la naturaleza. Nuestro bienestar depende de la salud del planeta. Hoy, aquí y ahora. La vida sigue. La vida puede ser lo que soñamos. Muchas cosas han cambiado. El camino comienza a ser diferente. Construimos una transición justa y solidaria, pensando nuestra vida finita desde la conexión con quienes no conocemos, quienes aún no han nacido o están a kilómetros de distancia. Urge la acción. El reto es hoy. Es nuestro. El cambio climático es conmigo.
Climate change belongs to me.
So I wrote this. Music was an arrangement from Andrés Montero with the Symphonic Orchestra of Bogota. So we asked together, how would the 4 seasons of Vivaldi would sound as if we write those? So going back to the public policies and climate change, I want to go in greater detail in what is in yellow. So one of the strategies that has been designed on national level, I'm talking about the education and the awareness of different audience. So this is a strategy that was developed in 2010, is going to be updated and acknowledges the different processes that we have to think about the art as the answer to sustainability. And here we're saying that the information is quite technical and it cannot reach the whole citizens. So this is how we need to find a way to communicate the best practices. And we acknowledge that culture and society are key to tackle back the climate crisis, and that we should think about the different voices that we have in the territories and how can we reach each one of them, acknowledging the visions, the values of each community. And bearing this in mind, the strategy what sets is that the main goals is that this knowledge and the science should reach the Colombian society. Thinking about the language that will be easy to understand, and they will be a day-by-day knowledge that will be useful for the people, so it could be taken into action. Education, training, and raising the awareness of the audience about climate crisis is key to move this adaptation and mitigation. So what do we need to do? So we start thinking, and from Fondo Acción, we start thinking, how could we move people? So the first thing is to have the national strategy of climate financing. So it's to identify what will be the concrete actions that we need to do to tackle about the climate change. So we have the Finance Management Committee. So in 2015, they said that we should support this committee, so it will
Recording in progress.
Con eso en mente, sí, agarré la idea anterior o el reto que teníamos de posicionar al comité, lo planteamos.
This committee, and we thought that we could raise awareness and this communication of the climate crisis from the art. So we made a contest that is still alive, and it has been supported with some other sponsors. And the idea is to connect our emotions farther from what we have on our minds of what is climate change, but to have our emotions and put those into action. Here we have the first thing that we did, and it has to do with the audio that you heard before. So this was the performance that we did from the Four Seasons from Vivaldi. So that was quite concrete. We had different performers that would be like having a sort of dialogue. What would be the way that you can translate the music that we're hearing in terms of the climate change? From the contest, we have had different years, and what we have done is that we have called different artists that have made their performers around the climate change. So we have had kids, we have had our arts from comics, and some others that have been well developed, or some other paper-based, different formats where they are using humor to reach some other audience like youth or adults. How can they send a message saying, here we have a problem and we have a solution? With music as well, we have been having different projects with Latin Latas that you had them yesterday with Andres Villamil. We made a recording for kids, and this is one of the most recent, and it was in 2018. This is Melissa Pareza work, and the question is, what is the weight of climate crisis, the semantics of this? And she started exploring a little bit, and she says that those two words are used in such a way in different scenarios that we have become immune to it. So she started having a reflection, thinking about this change word in Spanish, which is cambio. So she started doing handmade tattoos to people for which change and change towards everything that has to do with sustainability would be meaningful for their lives. So she made different interviews, and she did these tattoos that you can see, some of the ones she made. They publish showing all of these interviews and saying that life is a constant change. Life is not static. Life has been changing in our planet, and the planet has changed itself. But we are responsible towards the change that we are inducing in the weather. So these are some of the current projects that we have. Two in Santander department and the other one in Santa Marta city that you see on the left from Natalia Ortiz. Use light as the sustainable element to make photographs, and they print those on leaves. And the other one will be interventions in public spaces, like the one you see at the bottom, where you rescue pieces of glass that they are on the sea, and they would transform it to put it back into the sea. So the last version that we have of this contest, in order to reach more other audiences, we had another element, and we started asking, how can we make this contest sustainable itself? Not only in the message, but also in the way that we were running it. So having less waste, less impact in terms of energy consumption, and having reusable materials, like the minimum harm possible, as we have heard before in the forum. How can we do the best, making the less harm possible? So in terms of communication, we start another pathway, having a narrative from the territories, strengthening their skills. So I was telling you that we were thinking first, what was the strategy for financing and climate change? So we need to connect in a different way here. So in this one in particular, we're talking about the forest. So maybe you have heard about the dramatic figures that we see that our countries have 50% cover of forests. We are losing them in very accelerated rates, and that has a severe threat for our life and the planet lives. So the challenge that we're facing at the moment, or that we had on 2015, was this national strategy to formulate a strategy to see how can we reduce the effective participation to set up this strategy. So we focus from communication. We made this from Afro-Colombian communities that have settled their interest to have their own cultural expressions to connect with the different processes that we had. So I was reading back then a book, Véanme mis nanas negras. And it is this empathy that we have when you are in front of an art piece. So when you are enjoying everything, when you're putting in their own shoes. So understanding that, that's what I felt with this book. And it was part of what we were trying to design back then with the strategy. And there I have a reflection from two authors, Jose Albelda and I ran out of time, so I'm so sorry. But in this reflection, they say that the crisis that we're going through needs to have a tremendous change in our way how we relate with the biosphere. So they talk about the empathy that we should have with the rest of the planet and with the other beings, so we can generate this transition that is needed. Thinking about that, I found an opportunity, and here we made an alliance with the Cari Cuervo Institute, and of course with the Ministry of Environment and a sponsor, which is the Forest Comber Partnership. And we were using the same language to have a training that we could take to the territory on the Pacific with the Afro-Colombian communities. So this is what we had issue with what we had. We wanted to have new stories. We wanted to tell stories about the forest, but we wanted to have a fresh and new narrative. So we gathered different writers from the community. So we went to the territory and we ran a process of 4 months where we in each week, we were traveling among the 4 departments, starting from Nariño, then Cauca, Valle del Cauca, and then we'll finish in Chocó department, and in different municipalities in the Pacific. So we will have something in common, and then we will go and explore the forest. So the classroom became the forest itself from the territory, having a great experience walking over the line that we were having a different creativity experience. This one, what we had, which is the Maletín of Relatos Pacíficos. This is written by Juan Cárdenas, and he is describing the territory. And when you read, it's like when you are walking through there. And when you write, literature is the acknowledgement of this feel of all the experiences. So with this, Juan Alberts made a reflection on the same exercise. There were the two teachers that we have for this training, the two researchers from the Instituto Carecuervo. They need this reflection about the classroom, but being on the field, the forest, as a great opportunity to take this to different scenarios where the class are not verticals from the teacher to the students, but it's a dialogue and it's a different creation process. So these are some pictures that we had from this experience. We wanted to go and travel and walk through the forest to feel what they were saying. So we had some chances to make these cultural expressions, understanding their own ways to express art, once again, to connect with them, to raise the right questions. How should we say this? With whom? Very specific transportation ways. You can see here how they move with motorcycles over a trailway. This is another track that we made. So we could have a significant experience that was quite inspiring. So this was the sort of graduation that we had in Apartado. And this is the final product. And this is something important that I want to highlight here. So during the creative process, what we said was that we wanted to have a beautiful product using art. So of course we have technical contents. So on the first booklet, you can see this on the manifest that we have from the art and aesthetics. We wanted to have something appealing, that someone will have it in a special place in their houses, because there we will gather in all these stories. So we didn't want to have a normal book. This is the digital version that we have. So we're trying to enhance the audience and reach some other publics, not only the paper-based version. We presented the fair in 2017, and then during 2018, we were traveling among different regions of the country, and we took it back to the communities where we wrote all these stories. We had it on our podcast channel, once again, having other ways to reach populations and audiences, so it could be communicated in the Pacific communities and in other regions of the countries. Then thinking once again, where are the problems for our forest? We made a photography contest where the prizes, the top 20, was to review the portfolio from a very select group of experts. And they would give them feedback and they would give them support. The one that you see at the center of the picture, he was the winner, Sebastián Villegas. So he got a sponsor to make a travel between Vigía del Puerto and Quibdó. And this is the book that summarizes his vision, his perspective of the problems that they face in this region. Once again, appealing to the aesthetics, we're talking about photography, having a very strong narrative that has been constructed during the different chapters of the book. The process was presented in the book fair, the book party in Medellin. We had an exposition in the Botanic Garden in Bogota, and the idea was to raise a dialogue farther from the environmental sphere, but just raising the awareness of what's happening in our forest. In many of these processes, we want to strengthen the skills. And we made another contest, so the ones that want to do something to preserve the forest will find their own art expressions to communicate this. Some of this through songs. So here we have carranga, carrilera, pop, and other rhythms that are quite popular over these territories. Photography. So they could have the good resolution pictures, high quality images, so they can tell their story in a better way, different from what they used to do before. At the end of the day, after these exercises, we had a sort of impact over the public policy, and the national strategy of controlling this would express that culture and narratives based on our own tradition are an element for the preservation of the forest, where we are valuing the forest in a different way and understanding that our life depends on this. This is back in 2018. So we wanted to have an exercise of editing the material that we have. So we raised the skills, we made the trainings, and here the main goal was that the narrative that is taking place on the territory, we will find the right format to express this. So in different spaces where we haven't found maybe prior combat or victims of the armed conflict, of public forces people, community inhabitants. So how can we put them all together around, how can we make these books, handmade books, as you can see in this picture, with jelly, as we used to do maybe in the schools. So these are some of the products that we had in 6 different libraries that we created for this. Then 2019, from music, an association with Canalón de Timbiquí and Llorona Records. So it was produced, there was a nominee for Latin Grammys in 2019, where the reflection is how traditional music at the end of the day would become the ecosystem, because we know the forest, like the music will be telling what's happening in the forest, but this music won't be possible if the forest doesn't exist, because the marimba, the wasa, all these instruments are being made by what is present in the forest. So this movement, the rhythm, the sounds will tell us about the sounds of the sea, the sounds of the forest, and they won't live without another. And how can we preserve this forest? If we don't do that, we won't have the music either. Here we see another format that was presented here in Jorge Eliezer Gaitán with the Symphonic Orchestra of Bogota. So we could tell a little bit more about Alexander von Humboldt, celebrating his birth. So we made a highly historical performance that was trying to raise awareness of preserving the forest and the last trip that he made over our country. And here I have some of the reflections as a conclusion. So how can I put together art and sustainability? On one side of the coin, we see different aesthetics narratives that are different, there are plurals, that are diverse. We need to know how to tell this in a different way. As I was telling you, we have images, we have literature, we have the performances, we have operas, we have many, many art forms that you might be thinking of, but there are those that would touch our emotions. I will connect with the audiences, thinking from the territories, thinking even from professionals that are amateurs in arts. There are many, many that has many things to say, and we need that. And we also need that the art will be a horizontal practice within the community. So you can see here that we're not imposing ourselves and we're not leading like in a hierarchical way. This is a dialogue exercise, a spaces that are strengthening the skills. We are learning, they are learning as well. So in this exchange process is where we can create a new performance, a new way to communicate the message. We put together experiences and knowledges. This is why we go to the territories. So we are very good listeners. We go, we listen, and we do together. And we try that this sort of expressions from the culture could put it into the table and could become projects for the preservation, sustainable development, or how are we going to take care of the environment. Scientific communication, I was showing you with Humboldt. So we need, and is it an interest of us? We should find a broader audience, not that exclusive audiences. How can we make it easier, and how can we put it closer? And art became the pathway. How can you feel? So these distances will become shorter. We just need to change the language and the format. This is very clear. It's a big exercise. It will take time and great effort. So we need to put our heart and our mind on this. So with this, we're going to change the way how we understand this, so we can act different. So we want to enhance the experiences with different senses. So here we play, we feel, we see. There are different ways that we can connect to one another, and we can try them all. And empathy. How can we reconnect with nature? I feel that there is a gap between nature, and we have a lot of people with the will to have this sort of connection once again with the planet, with their own life, and with the rest of the human beings. And art became the way to do this. What for? Here I have a reflection that I took with Julie's bicycle over systemic thinking. Next one, please.
Thinking about climate change, how we can react to different events, for example, floods or droughts. We can anticipate them by thinking and doing forecasts in order to think about how we can act in the future and build infrastructure, for example, and how to respond with infrastructure design that can support the growth or more ventilation because there would be higher temperatures. Ultimately, what's under this model of change management is transforming mindsets. We need to think different. We don't think different, we won't act different. We could build dams, we could lift areas, we could change lighting, but if we don't think differently, we are no longer going to do anything. In fact, that's one of the most existential questions that I had asked myself, which is how coherent are we when we draw climate change policies? If policymakers and those who design and execute projects are coherent or consequent in our daily actions. So how can we do it? How can we click and light a spark in order to become different? The proposal has always seen change perspective as this picture. If you can see both images, you can see that it's both at the same time. I can see them both at the same time. It's a duck or a rabbit. We can have to change perspective, ask ourselves the right questions. and promoting what we call a virtuous circle, where we connect ideas, reasons, theory, scientific information, all the technical data with our emotions. We're connecting to both our hemispheres, and this connection creates a positive virtuous circle. That's what this is about. Thank you.
Hola a todos, yo soy Diana Pérez Mejía, líder de la Comisión
Hello,
Fílmica de
I'm
Bogotá,
Diana
un programa de
Perez
la Gerencia de
Mejía,
Artes
leader
Audiovisuales
of
de
the
Lidartes.
Bogotá Film Commission from Lidartes.
El Manual de Buenas Prácticas para la Producción Audiovisual en Bogotá, que desarrolló la
Good
Comisión
Practice
Fílmica
Manual
de
for
Bogotá, tiene un capítulo de
Film
recomendaciones
Production.
medioambientales que fue desarrollado en
Has a
conjunto con la
chapter
Comisión
of
Fílmica
environmental
Nacional
recommendations.
y reúne unas recomendaciones
It gathers a
medioambientales que
series
se
of
recogieron, digamos, de la observación
recommendations
del
gathered
comportamiento en campo
from
de las
observed
producciones audiovisuales en el país y en Bogotá en particular, pero también recogiendo los derechos de petición que Lidartes recibe constantemente de las comunidades respecto a las afectaciones al espacio público que resultan de los rodajes en la ciudad. Por otro lado, retomamos unas recomendaciones del British Columbia Creative Catalyst, que es una página web en donde se encuentran, digamos, en inglés estas recomendaciones y, digamos, se centran sobre todo en tres aspectos importantes: reducir, reutilizar y reciclar. El capítulo de recomendaciones de medio ambiente está enfocado en particularidades de cada uno de los departamentos de la producción audiovisual. Entonces hay unas recomendaciones para los equipos de producción y de dirección, para los equipos de arte, para los equipos de efectos especiales, incluso para la postproducción, para los stunts, en términos, como decía, de reducir, de reutilizar, de reciclar. Con el Manual de Buenas Prácticas para la Producción Audiovisual en Bogotá, esperamos que poco a poco vayamos implementando estos cambios en las producciones audiovisuales en cada uno de los departamentos para que, digamos, con el tiempo podamos ir cambiando y todos migrando a producciones un poco más amigables con el medio ambiente y que puedan tener un menor impacto en nuestra ciudad y para las comunidades y obviamente para la ecología.